I guess I can just hold it. Is that a little bit better? Cool. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me today. I know that you were probably all expecting Cindy and hoping for Cindy, but that's okay. I think that there's a lot that I can say too about Experiment. So yeah, and I'm always happy to share a little bit about what I've learned about crowdfunding in the last year. So I guess before I jump into too many specifics, I will kind of introduce the central premise of Experiment. So most fundamentally, our objective is to help investigators, researchers, get funding for their early stage, seed stage research projects from the crowd, so through crowdfunding. So most simply, a researcher has a discrete research idea, they want to get it funded, so they pitch that to the crowd. So for that reason, that kind of lumps us in with a lot of other platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, which probably most people are familiar with. But rather than talk about how we're similar, I'd like to focus a little bit on how we're different. And so with that in mind, I'll do it in maybe kind of an unconventional way. So what I wanted to share is an update from one of our most recently funded projects. So the title here is Inside a Dead Infected Ant. And so I actually kind of deliberately chose this project because it's pretty unusual. And it's one of the weirder ones we've had on the site, but it's really cool. So most basically, Carissa de Becker is studying a parasitic fungus that basically gets inside of an ant and controls its actions. I guess it's like kind of a mind control virus. And so basically what it does is it sort of forces ants to climb high up into trees, and from there they die, and then the parasitic fungus spreads. And so she called her project Zombie Ants. Basically, they are parasites that perform mind control on these ants. And so this is actually skipping ahead to the end of the process for her. So at this stage, she's already been funded, she's received the funding, and she's starting to work on the research she set out to do. So what this is here is an update to all of her backers. And so what she's done is provided some context. She used a lot of, we can't really scroll here because this is just a screenshot from the site. But basically she provides some context and she explains her most recent progress. And so this is originally intended for just her supporters, her backers. So she had 106 people chip in on average $40 to raise just over $4,000 for this research. So again, the scale is pretty small, but it was enough for her to get enough funding to kind of get it off the ground. And so even though it was only intended for that kind of audience of 106, her original backers, you can see that it had 7,279 visits or views. So this update got a ton of traffic. It had a lot of interest from people around the internet. Most notably, it went viral on Reddit, as did a lot of her lab notes. And so she was really able to kind of harness this community of people that are just genuinely interested in kind of wild things that you would never expect, like mind control fungi. And so kind of the point I wanted to bring home with all of this is that, so the biggest question we're asked at Experiment is, okay, well, how can you compare to other crowdfunding platforms like Kickstarter, like Indiegogo, when the central premise there is that the project leader has to offer a tangible reward? So if you go on Kickstarter and you support a music album, it makes sense for you to get the music album in return. That's kind of the natural output for the project. When you're dealing with basic research, it's not always as clear what the natural output is. What can you really offer someone other than the fact that you're learning something really cool, really awesome? And so I would argue that that is actually a lot more valuable than sending someone a paperweight or a mug or a shot glass or something in exchange for supporting the research. Not only do you kind of firsthand get to contribute to the work that is really cool, but you get to see firsthand not only the results, not only the polished stuff that you see in papers and sometimes in mainstream media, but really kind of the process as it happens. You get to see sort of the pitfalls, the hurdles that you jump, and really what makes research really fun to do. And so that's where I think we can really provide value to backers, more so than you could with a traditional, I guess, gift-based crowdfunding campaign. So anyway, I guess that's what makes us a little bit different. I can quickly explain how it works, and this I'm sure will get fleshed out in the questions later. But most basically, a researcher with a discrete research project idea can put it online. They share that project. We help them share it with the target or potential audiences that would be interested in funding this work. Obviously, that's highly variable for different research projects. The zombie ant one will probably have a different target audience than an HIV/AIDS research project. But in any case, that's kind of where we also help out, help promote the campaign, help figure out who would really most be inclined to fund it. And then finally, once the project meets its goal, how to provide the best experience for the backers so that they come back and fund future rounds of projects, how to involve them in the research, make them feel like they've really supported something cool. So anyway, obviously we'll be fielding more questions after this, but if anything comes up afterwards, don't hesitate to email me. I'm oscar@experiment.com. So thanks.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. So I'm just going to give you an overview of where crowdfunding is at UCSF, how it started, what some of our experiences have been, and then really it's up to you guys to ask questions and about the success or failure of some of our projects and what are some of the trends we've seen and within our own crowdfunding campaigns, as well as some logistical questions you might have about how to get started here at UCSF. So we had a few goals as we started. I partnered with the Office of Innovation, Technology, and Alliances to conceive of possible uses for crowdfunding at UCSF. And it really came from the Office of ITA because they were working with faculty and postdocs who had a product they wanted to bring to market. And they were looking for effectively some kind of commercialization vehicle. I don't work in that sector. I work in the fundraising sector, which is philanthropy. The use of dollars through philanthropy is a lot more flexible. We support a range of campaigns from individual professorships to large capital projects like the campaign for the Mission Bay hospitals over in Mission Bay. So we kind of got together and figured out a way to leverage the philanthropy office, which is the development office in alumni relations, to support these small commercialization or research funding efforts. And so we wanted to lead the way. There's always that competitive streak in us. So we partnered with Indiegogo to launch our pilot. And there is a partner page, it's indiegogo.com/partners/UCSF, where you'll see about 9 projects that we launched over the last 2 years, and you'll see a range of results on that page. And you can kind of see for yourself what might have been more compelling on some projects than others, but there's a lot of little tidbits of unexpected results, and as well as unexpected non-results based on the size and the scope of certain projects. We wanted to fill a void, so this is why you're all here, right? We have funding gaps, we need seed funding. We really wanted to just act or provide a service really for investigators and their teams to raise relatively small amounts of money, and then to democratize that. So the fundraising office tends to work on institutional priorities. So large scholarship campaigns, investitures for chairs and other research projects, and of course capital projects to help keep this place growing physically. So we wanted to give basically provide a channel for small fundraising projects where investigators would effectively do the work themselves with some support from development. And then as much as it is a fundraising tool, crowdfunding is a marketing tool. So there aren't a lot of easy ways for smaller research programs to get their exciting research in the news or on the web. And so if you're out there marketing your project and your idea, and you're reaching a specific audience that has an interest in what you're doing, it's out there. It's on social media. It's on the web, and it is a form of marketing. So you see the results here. We've received almost 650 contributions on crowdfunding platforms, and what that means for you as investigators is that 650 people that we can then follow up with next year, the year after, and long into the future, and that's effectively the most important aspect or role of the fundraising office is to establish and then maintain really close relationships with funders. And it's why it exists within the development shop and not at ITA. Here are some just crowdfunding best practices. Some of it may seem really obvious, but frankly, it's not as easy as it looks. You need to know your audience. What are they looking for? What do they want to hear from you? How can you best illustrate the impact of your work? Who are you reaching out to is key, and if you're a rock star, so to speak, and you've been in the SF-Gate and the New York Times and on the cover of major journals, you have some name recognition. You may be able to post a project and raise a 5-figure goal. But for most of us, it takes a team. It takes a lot of people working in many different roles to make projects successful. And one of those roles is actually the development office, is leveraging the development office for support as much as we can give it. Again, the pitch, you have to keep it personal. You have to kind of exude passion in everything you say, and video is essential. They want to see a face. They want to see you flustered. They want to see you excited at the same time, and showing your work is really helpful, especially with basic science, because if you're going to put it down on paper, you're going to lose people. You need to have front and center a visual representation of the work that you're doing, and part of that is you. The commitment is key, and if you go to that Indiegogo site, 30 to 60 days may not seem like a lot of time, but it's campaigning every day for that period, and it's a lot of work. So you need to be committed to it and do a lot of planning ahead of time to basically get the best result. And then stewardship is, again, as I mentioned before, is where the development office plays a key role, is planning to stay in touch with your donors. So even if you leave to go to Stanford or UW or Vanderbilt, the development office still has those names, and they know what those individuals are interested in. And there may be another project down the road that will interest that individual that could benefit the institution even more broadly. So we took it in-house, so to speak. We went from Indiegogo, which is a terrific platform, and it's global and has a tremendous reach, but really to make it more UCSF friendly, it's putting our branding on it, it's making it more flexible for our needs, and giving us a much better visual representation of the work that's happening. We partnered with ScaleFunder, and Michael, who you'll hear from in a moment, to support social giving. So it's not just crowdfunding, and I'm not going to get into the details of the other potential use cases for it, but we're looking at large-scale marketing, fundraising marketing campaigns on this service, and it's a curated process. So we want to have a discussion with all of our PIs who are running campaigns, and to get a better understanding of how they can be successful in this climate, and then maybe even if it may be best to go to a different platform if there's a competition, for instance, on the Crowdfund UCSF. So that's crowdfund.ucsf.edu, and that launched in November with 3 projects. This is on the left is the homepage, and you can see it's very visual. We've had 3 projects so far. One was an annual fund project where our cancer center raises least restrictive funds for cancer research across the enterprise, mainly through direct mail. So, we put out a lot of letters, and those are the ones that you might get in your mailbox every 3 to 4 weeks sometimes, it seems, especially from your alma mater. But we were able to show our thousands of direct mail recipients what we do in a very visual way. So Frank McCormick, the outgoing director of the Cancer Center, told his story and described the benefit and the impact of unrestricted dollars to the Cancer Center. The multiple myeloma campaign was very successful, where we were able to engage existing major donors with a fundraising campaign, and they told their story, they spread it to their friends, and they made, in one case, a 5-figure gift on the platform to really show this community of patients and their families what's really needed to make progress in this research. And then we had a project from the School of Nursing for a mobile health application that didn't raise a lot of money, but we found it very valuable in identifying a few potentially great prospects, meaning larger donors down the road. So we've only had 3 projects since November, but we have a lot more in the pipeline. So that's all I'm going to say for now. As Jonathan said, I'm outgoing. So if you have questions today, I'll answer them. If you have a card, I'll take it, and I'll hand it off to Megan Smith, who's taking my place in the interim, and we'll happily have a conversation with any one of you about your fundraising needs. Thanks.
All right, so my background is I'm actually part of the UC family. I originally was at UCLA, and when I was there, I actually saw something, and Daniel and his team were actually pretty cutting edge, so we were inspired by UCSF, but we had a similar problem. And the problem was our PIs and students, as well as program managers, were all suffering from funding gaps. You know, sequestration was underway. We were finding all of the classic revenue streams were drying up. And the development office, and in this case I'm talking about UCLA, really wasn't positioned to handle it. Because as you know, every university is in the middle of a huge campaign at any particular time. It's usually priorities set by your deans. And so when you are a junior researcher or a postdoc, you're kind of fodder off to the corner. So it was one of those things where in my position at UCLA, we were looking at how we could reconcile the fact that our donors weren't finding things to engage with, and at the same time we had all of these new funding needs happening on campus. And so really what I'm going to talk about for my brief period of time here is more storytelling. Because I think what you've just heard from the prior 2 speakers is sort of the mechanisms of crowdfunding and maybe your expectations on how much you might raise. But I'm actually going to talk more about telling your story and how I came into this. And then we can drill in specifics, I'm sure, in the Q&A section. So my background was I grew up actually near NASA in Houston, Texas. And I was inspired by it. You know, it was right at the tail end of the golden era. So I grew up in the 80s when, I just dated myself a little, but I grew up in the 80s when, you know, the space shuttle was everything to young kids. And for me, it was all about this bigger idea, this metaphorical idea of reaching. So I wanted to go into science originally because for me it was this sense of adventure, and my eyesight was incredibly bad, so I wasn't going to be a pilot. And so that was really my only way in. The problem here is that once you enter the world of science, it becomes about grant writing. And the reason why I really want to start talking about this for my brief time is grant writing is talking, in a sense, to yourself. You're inside of the bubble. And the crowd that we're talking about, and we'll probably talk about for the remainder of our time here, is outside of it. They're not experts, but they are passionate. And in many cases, specifically for CFAR, they might actually have familial connections to people that could be theoretically touched by your science, or they've seen people that suffered because what you're chasing hasn't yet been achieved. So with telling your story on crowdfunding, it really comes down to a few basic ideas. The first thing is this idea of metaphor or analogy. The project I pulled up here is actually one of the initial projects at UCLA's platform that they're now leveraging to help tell these stories for postdocs, and it's called Spark, by the way, so spark.ucla.edu. And this particular postdoc had won the paper award this year, so they were working on telomerase, and you know, he needed a few more hours on the electron microscope to resolve the human structure for telomerase. So I went to speak with him, incredibly eloquent, spoke about all the different ways where this morphology might lead to exciting new advances in pharmacology, and I said, whoa, wait a minute, but what in the world does it do? If you're either not a biochemist or like me, or just a dumb student of physics, tell me what in the world this does. And he says, oh, it's tied to aging and cancer. I said, wait, what? Oh yeah, no, this is tied to cellular division and aging and cancer. So we sat down for 30 minutes and came up with a couple cool metaphors, and before you know it, he's giving basically a primer on Science 101 for what he does. And what was so cool about this is here he is in this lab that historically had been incredibly well funded, but they didn't have these supplemental monies for researching these cool topics, and they didn't have fans. And so all of a sudden, he puts this up. He happens to be, I think by objective standards, a good-looking gentleman. And all of a sudden, he's got fans outside of his bubble. So they raised their money incredibly quickly, but what was so neat is they also gained some patrons. And while I'm not talking about the Medicis with Galileo, they did get people in there that were willing to give $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to his particular project, and to Daniel's point, open up dialogues that could lead to downstream major gifts. So, you know, for a long time, science has been able to be divorced from the world of development. Development has always put the names on the buildings, and scientists are in the labs trying to get the grant money. But I would say that the new world order we're in is sort of a blend of the two. Private monies are going to further support and supplement your core grants, but you have to learn how to tell your story. So really quickly, what I'd like to do here is talk a little bit about ways people engage. And I think Oscar is absolutely right, by the way, when he's talking about people do want to follow your science. They want to know what you're doing, but it does need to be accessible. But other cool things can happen too. So I don't know if everyone can see it, but off to the side there are these different giving levels that people gave at. And if you see at the $500 level, which for someone giving a discretionary amount of $500, that's signaling a lot. 5 people gave at that level. And do you know what he did? He gave a 3D printout of the molecule they were looking for. So why does that matter? Well, first of all, it's personal. Second of all, every time that person keeps it on their desk or in their office or some other place of honor, they're going to think about the science they created, but it's a conversation piece for others. So it's championing your work, but it's also potentially inviting in new people of interest. And then at the highest level, they actually had people come back to the laboratory itself. So in a sense, you're bringing people in, and now it's not for an athletic event. You're the star attraction. So again, in a world of grant writing and lack of ostentation, I'm not asking you to use hyperbole, but what I am saying is that if you can come up with a way to tell your story and really own it, this may be the new way to connect with your future patrons. So he ended up raising his goal. I will tell you, he's now at Moderna. So he ended up going over to Boston, and he's now working in RNA. But what was so neat to me is that he was as much an educator as he was doing basic science here. So I'll wrap it up with this. When you're hearing us on the platform, the one thing I want you to think about is, what is your story, and why did you originally get into this? Because I know I got into this company, and why I built it, because I was terrible in the lab, but I was a huge fan of science, and I wanted to help scientists. And I always imagined myself on a little train ride, you know, and there was this patent clerk next to me, and it's 1905, and he's got some crazy ideas, and I want to be a part of that story. So there's a lot of people in here right now that are going on an exceptional journey, and the rest of us want to be a part of it. And so that's really how you should approach this. So, thank you.